Welcome to the Tapestry of Life. I am Dr. Pascal Scholes, Professor of Behavioral Health and Human Services at Community College of Philadelphia. Today's topic is violence prevention, education, and intervention, Mothers in Charge. Mothers in Charge is a violence prevention, education, and intervention program for youth, young adults, families, and community organizations. Mothers in Charge are comprised of impassioned mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters who are committed to working towards saving lives. Most of the members have experienced the horror of having a son or daughter or a loved one murdered. Because of the death of their loved one, each mother and member is committed to saving lives and preventing another mother from having to experience this terrible tragedy. To discuss this topic today, I want to welcome back my co-host, Derek Ford from the Department of Behavioral Health in the City of Philadelphia, and my very special guests, Dorothy Johnson, founder and executive director, and Marcia Hopkins, a survivor. I like to use the word survivor. Maybe we can say something different about that. So welcome to the show. It's kind of, I had a chance to look at your website, and you really are doing some really fabulous things. And I must say, as the founder and executive director, it must make you proud.
Yes. Yes. I am very proud of the work the organization has done over the last 11 years. It's a group of courageous women who are working every single day to make a difference. And these are women who could have laid down and died as a result of the loss of their loved ones. But every single day, they get up as a part of the organization of Mothers in Charge to make a difference in the city of Philadelphia and actually around the country. Yeah. Because we're now a national organization.
I know, you're in about, from what I understand, you're in like 3 or 4 large cities, or 5. Or...
Yeah, actually we're in 6 larger cities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you travel a lot.
We do.
I guess the concept of, violence is anywhere. So I guess you could have 50 or 60 chapters if you really had the energy, because it's all over.
That is what is happening now. We are actually organizing in many of the major cities and starting groups like Mothers in Charge to be able to provide support to families when they've lost a loved one, but also to work to provide ways that we can provide intervention and prevention in communities across the country around the issue of gun violence.
Okay. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about how you became the founder, and what led you to actually pick up this very important topic?
My 24-year-old son, colleague Jabbar Johnson, was shot to death, shot 7 times over a parking space. And initially I wanted to die. Mm-hmm. But at some point, and I guess it was about 2 years after colleague's death, that I decided I wanted to do something to make a difference. So myself, along with 2 or 3 other moms who had lost children, decided we would start Mothers in Charge. And that's how it got started, and that was in May of 2003. We had our first meeting at Zion Baptist Church in North Philadelphia, and we've been on the move ever since.
Yeah. Did they ever catch the person?
Yes, the person who murdered my son actually had murdered someone else 5 months before he murdered colleague. He murdered Justin Donnelly. He was 19 years old. So in July, Ernest Odom murdered Justin, and 5 months later, he murdered my son. So in a 5-month period, he took the lives of 2 young men who had a very promising future, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder in both situations, and is serving 2 life sentences.
I've had the good fortune actually to read some of your stories as prepping for the program, and they are shock. It's hard for me to understand, having not lost someone in that manner, how you even survive and live through it. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the 19-year-old, he was the one that was an argument over his dog or something, and then they thought he punched him, but he actually stabbed him. So, and you say, well, what the heck's going on in this world,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, oftentimes perpetrators of violence are oftentimes victims themselves, of violence and living in homes and housing situations where that's all they've seen, that's all they know. So I think a lot of the work that we do around prevention has to look at those kinds of situations and see how we can maybe prevent, before it gets to someone so angry and out of control that they could take two lives? What can we do, to prevent something like that from happening? So that's really the work that we do, in memory of our loved ones.
Yeah. We did a show a while ago on family violence, and what came out of that show, for me at least, was this thought of how long it took for the criminal justice system to react to the death, the murders, and how long it took them to bring them to, a disposition in the sense of them going. And how stressful that was. Is that a common?
Yeah, it's very stressful for the family. I mean, because you're waiting to hear from the district attorney's office or from any of the law enforcement agencies that are involved. You're constantly waiting to hear, to get a number, you're constantly waiting to hear, a date for a trial or something like that, if the person's in custody. Now, there's oftentimes where there hasn't been an apprehension of the person responsible, and that wait is even longer and worse. So, I mean, the criminal justice system, it could take anywhere from a year to 2 years before someone would go to trial. I think it was about 18 months before we went to trial for my son's murder. And you're constantly, waiting to hear that call. When are you going to go to trial? When are you going to have to face the person who's responsible? So all of those kind of things are devastating on a family to have to live through. But it's all a part of what happens when you lose someone to violence. It's not like a natural death where someone dies of an illness. These are all the kind of things that cause the trauma and, the devastation and kind of insult to injury with families who've lost loved ones to violence.
Yeah. When I think of the history of just watching you since the inception of Mothers in Charge, and we've developed a healthy relationship since 2003.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I applaud you for your leadership, but Mothers in Charge is one of those programs that women just don't sign up for membership. And when you think of the senseless murders and violence that has happened here in the city of Philadelphia and surrounding cities and states, you just stay persevering, moving forward, not only with Mothers in Charge, and I've met just a host of mothers who've been a part of the organization, and I applaud them for their leadership during the dates of their loved ones' loss or birthdays and holidays, and it's a lot. It's quite strenuous, so I applaud you for that. And every time I see you, I say, there's a leader. There's really a true leader. So again.
But I also just want to say, and as you mentioned, this is something that I couldn't have done by myself.
Yeah.
It is really the women who make up the organization that has been able to help it still be here 11 years later, because it's a nonprofit organization. It's very difficult to run with limited funds and things like that. And more so because of the issues that we deal with. I mean, when we talk to a newly bereaved mom who's just lost her son or daughter to violence, we touch our own pain. So it's very difficult work, that we do. But I could not have done it without the women who make up this organization.
Yeah. When we get calls in the city through the police department, watching the media all the time when there was a recent shooting, and we always say, well, you need to get in touch with Dorothy from Mothers in Charge, because that's a great support mechanism for her. It's just one that, I watch you ladies, and over the years and years of just going through the trials and tribulations of current shootings and murders and violence, and you just keep moving forward. Yeah.
Well, earlier we were talking before the show. We had mentioned the fact that what seems to happen is every time an event hits the TV, it's almost like post-traumatic stress. It rekindles all those old thoughts, and so you're constantly dealing. Am I right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's no escaping.
Yeah, you can't get rid of it.
Sometimes you just have to turn the news off and say, I'm just not going to look, I'm not going to listen, because it does, it gets to be a bit much at times.
Yeah.
Especially now we're dealing with so much violence in the news. Not just in Philadelphia, but across the country.
Yeah.
And we're working. That's why we're working to empower women to be intervention and prevention in their communities, like Mothers in Charge. So we're going around the country, linking with similar organizations or starting chapters of Mothers in Charge, so that we can continue to do this work. And I mean, the goal is to be out of business. We don't want Mothers in Charge to continue to have to be here because we've lost loved ones to violence. The goal is to be out of business. One day.
Yeah.
One day.
Not in our lifetime, I don't think. It's just.
Maybe not. But
it seems to be getting worse, not better.
Maybe it will be a benefit for our children.
Oh, yes,
and
definitely.
Our grandchildren. I have a 4-year-old grandson, so my hope is one day that he'll be able to walk the streets without worrying about whether he's going to be shot to death.
Right. So let me shift slightly a little bit.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting because we talked about what happens when the event first occurs, and I think part of your story that I heard had a lot to do with your introduction to it. I know you're a graduate student right now in the School of Social Work, and that you're working with Mothers in Charge. But how did you come to know them?
So I went to Mothers in Charge. I did my undergrad internship there. I was at IUP, and I had also lost my brother 2 years before I went to Mothers in Charge. So when I got there, I had never discussed my brother being murdered here in Philadelphia, and so it kind of come about me working with Miss Dorothy that I was also experiencing grief at the same time that I was working with the families and the youth during my internship. And so I kind of went through my own journey of grief and kind of figuring out how to work through it and actually understanding that it is a process that you have to work through. And so I did experience some post-traumatic stress and kind of reliving that experience when I came to the organization. And so it was really great to work with Ms. Dorothy, and I got some counseling myself to kind of understand where I was.
I guess grief counseling would be
Yes,
good,
where I was in my own grief. And I think working with the moms and just being around people who could understand what I was going through really helped, because I never really talked to anyone in college about it because no one could relate to the grief that I was experiencing. So to be around other people who were okay with me crying all the time
Sure, yeah, oh yeah.
or having like a million questions of like, how do you deal with this? And then I think oftentimes, and I had talked to Miss Dorothy about this, when you're a sibling, the focus is a lot on the parents and not really how the siblings are affected. And I come from a really big, like, close family, and that was my only brother. And so when it happened, it kind of shattered the whole dynamic of our family. And so all of us experienced like tremendous grief. And I didn't know how to deal with it as a sibling and still provide support for my mom. Mm-hmm. And so I went through like this really long process with Miss Dorothy of kind of figuring where my role was and like how I felt about that over time.
Did your interest in becoming a social worker have anything to do with the event, or was it something you had already been planning for many years, for example?
I already been planning for this for many
so
years.
you had this kind of human service feel about you
already.
before, and then this kind of naturally would be helpful. So I assume when you get your MSW, you're going to work with Miss Dorothy more.
More so.
Absolutely.
I will say that being there did lead me on this path of I interned at the Juvenile Law Center, and so I've really been on this path the past several years of working with juveniles and kind of doing the prevention process, so steering people away from kind of engaging into any activities that could kind of harm their life in the future. So my focus is really working with young people.
You said that the loss is different from a parent and from a brother or a sister. Do you feel, could you explain what you mean by the difference? Is that possible?
So
sometimes it's a feeling and you can't explain it, you know?
It is. Well, I can explain it a little bit. So I can't imagine what it's like for a parent to lose their child. So sometimes what happens in my own experience, which is not purposefully from a parent, but oftentimes the parent's focus is only on the child that they've lost, but there are other children still there. And so a lot of the times it was hard because I didn't want to take away from what my mom was experiencing, but I felt like we're still here, we want to be here for you.
Yeah.
But her only focus was that she had lost her child and that she was in so much grief herself that she couldn't really focus that we were also grieving and wanted to be there for her. So it was really hard to try to provide that support because it's not that I don't want to take away from it, but I want you to know that I'm here and that there's still, your children are also grieving. Right. And so I just think it's hard for a parent to kind of see that because the loss is so intense because someone has taken your child from you. Like Ms. Dorothy said, it's not that they, have an illness and you've kind of expected it, but it's so unexpected that the parent is going through so much grief and then the siblings are trying to figure out. It's to me, it's kind of like figuring out where your place is.
Yeah.
And so I felt really lost. I just didn't know what to do.
Well, what's interesting about that, traditionally it's always been said that the parents, we usually bury our parents. And because of the way things are going today, the parents are bearing their youth or their kids, and it's quite difficult. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, based on what has happened recently in the country with the killings and murders, has that triggered anything in you, and how do you maintain buoyancy with your own delivery?
It does trigger things, like Ms. Dorothy said. Oftentimes I'm ready to like turn off the television or not discuss it. But in the work that I do and being a student, we constantly discuss it in class or in my internship or just in my everyday life. So for me, I kind of have to look at it like I want to prevent these things from happening, but so I have to focus on that.
Yeah.
So like you don't want someone to experience the same thing that you've experienced, but that seems to be what's happening with people. And losing someone that way is so traumatic. And so if there's anything that I could do to prevent someone, I don't want everyone to lose their sibling or their son. And it is very traumatic. So whatever I can do to prevent it, that's just where I kind of focus.
So Dorothy, based on what has happened recently, how do the women in the organization, how do they respond when they see the current events that's happening around the country? Or is there any particular program that you develop gathering the women and looking at what has happened nationally?
Yeah, recently we had a grief support program for all of us, for the staff, for everybody, and the focus was self-care. Because oftentimes when you're working with families who've had loss, and you've had a loss, no matter how long it may have been, you know, as you said, these things and the things that happen in the news, it triggers emotions. We begin to go back and remember our own situation.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we take care of ourselves. Self-care is so important, and oftentimes caregivers don't think, we're the last person we think about when it comes. We're going to care for everybody else, but we make ourselves last. Yeah. And I think especially when things like this, as you mentioned, happen in the news, or it's a certain time of the year, you know, we have to really focus on how we take care of ourselves, in addition to how we may want to support newly bereaved families that are coming. So that's very important. I just want to go back for a minute and piggyback on what Marcy had said about the parents oftentimes in such grief that they oftentimes are unable oftentimes to care for the remaining siblings, the remaining children. And I find that a lot, and I hear a lot, especially from surviving children, that say they think that their mom had just forgotten about them and the main focus was on the deceased child. And we refer to the siblings and other children in the family after a death as the forgotten mourners. Yeah. Because the focus is usually always, as she said, on the mom, but there are other children or other family members that are grieving, you know, and had a very special relationship with that person and is suffering too. But the mom's grief, and the dad, is oftentimes so intense that the only thing they can do is care for themselves, and they don't have the strength or the energy or focus to care for the forgotten mourners, which are the other children in the family. Yeah. So I think that Marcy brings a very unique and important perspective to this, being a sibling. You know, we're mothers in charge, but we're mothers, grandmothers, we're aunts, we're sisters, you know, we're even husbands and family, you know, who've lost loved ones and must support each other. And Marcy brings a very special piece to this because she's a young person. And young people traditionally don't like to talk about their feelings. But in Marcy, they have a young person that they can talk to. Maybe they experienced the same thing. Maybe they felt that they were being ignored, you know, from their mom and dad after their brother was, or son, or daughter, you know, or sister was murdered. So I've always, you know, relied on her and called to her when we had, you know, young people who were having a difficult time, and maybe I couldn't relate to them, but I know she could. Yeah. And there are a lot of young people out there today that are hurting because they've lost, you know, a brother or a sister or a cousin or a nephew, depending on the relationship. Oftentimes a cousin may feel like a brother to someone, you know. So, and a lot of times the acting out behavior that we see as a result is because no one's paying attention to their grief. So I think that's very important that we, you know, zero in on that and really have a focus, you know, to see how we can help young people when they're grieving. So Marcy's good with that, and I'm glad she's going to get her MSW and come back and help some young people at Mothers in Charge.
You're going to work for Dorothy. But no, when you think about young folks, and I'm quite sure you can relate to this, culturally, and I would say this, they become somewhat desensitized because of what's happening around them. The social environment they're in, loud music, and all these other negative forces. So when murder or the loss of a loved one, how do they respond? You said they don't talk about it. They just adjust because it's a norm. Wow, that's crazy.
Usually it's like a shutdown mechanism. And then also, like Miss Dorothy said, a lot of focus, in my experience, is it's a lot on adults, and not really talking to them and focusing on youth grief. And a lot of times, I mean, I see people, young people who have lost siblings, or whether they're siblings in prison, or because you can experience grief in multiple ways. It doesn't just have to be that someone has physically passed away. It could be that like your parents not present, or whatever the case may be. But young people, like, we tend to act out, and so our expression is very different from an adult's expression. But oftentimes that kind of gets missed until later on in people's life, when you become an adult, and then people want to look back and like, oh, okay, well, you experienced all this grief. But like, if there's any way that we could kind of focus on that when it happens immediately, I think it would just help young people more to be able to deal with it.
One of the things I enjoy about the show is that it triggers things in my mind when I'm listening to your stories. Actually, it does. My brother died. All my mother, father, and my brother, they're all deceased. I'm the only one that's kind of left, so to speak. But when my brother died, he was about 50-ish, and he died of a coronary, he had a very serious heart attack. He was overweight, etc. And when he died, I remember the anger I had towards my mother, because she totally ignored me for a long time. And as time went on, and I knew, because of my training, so to speak, that there was something wrong with that feeling, although it was a very natural feeling when I think about it now. But I remember saying, well, why didn't you pay attention to me? I mean, I lost my brother too, and it's always the Jimmy, and my Jimmy, and my Jimmy, and kept talking about him, and I almost felt, well, like, what, did I die too? I actually felt that. I said, well, maybe I died too, because they don't seem to be paying attention to me.
And that's why that siblings are called the forgotten mourners. I had the same experience with my daughter, who was very close to her brother, and when colleague was murdered, I couldn't. I mean, I was just in so much pain that my focus was on my pain and on my loss. And she suffered as a result of that. And we talk about it now, and she says the same thing you just said. I felt that you thought I died when colleague died because you just kind of totally abandoned me.
Right. And it wasn't, and I know as a mother, it wasn't intentional,
Never.
and I know that was not what you were thinking of, but the loss was so dramatic.
Exactly.
And at least the other siblings were alive and living, and you figure, well, I'll get to them eventually, but I have this grief. But it's something that I assume is something you work on in your grief work.
I do.
You have to take care of.
You know what's funny? As you were speaking, it just triggered something in me. I walked in a room and felt my mother on the floor dead. I was the oldest. I had two younger sisters, but then I look back in retrospect and say, well, maybe this might explain why my one sister just acted out, because I think I was so consumed with being the oldest and the man of the house. I had a support mechanism, but I didn't think about them.
Yeah.
So, it makes a lot of sense. Now here it is. We're talking 20 years later, and it just triggered.
Yeah.
You were so consumed with control, working, and we talk about different variations of grief.
Yeah.
Sure,
People
that's
often
right.
ask me, I don't know when I really was able to grieve about my mother's death. And I had a support mechanism. Later, I kind of incorporated, but I didn't think about my siblings, my sisters, That's it's
And unresolved grief is really, it can be very devastating. And as Marcy mentioned, a lot of times, you won't see someone crying or showing that kind of emotion, but they'll act out. Or with young children, you'll see grades fall in school, or, behaviors at recess time and things like that. And oftentimes it's anger, because they don't understand or no one's helping them through that grief process.
Yeah. And the great thing about that was I was in the recovery process. I had 2 years in recovery when my mother died. But my sister, my one particular sister, who was using and just running rapid because she didn't have a way to deal with the grief, the loss, and she started suffering from attachment separation disorder.
So self-medicating.
Yeah, and self-medicating. Wow.
Yeah, grief is something that we don't talk a lot about, but it's something that, it's a natural part of life. So is death and loss. It's a natural part of life, and how we handle it oftentimes, determines our outcomes in
I
life.
wonder why we don't talk about it. And I sit here sometimes, and I know that you're a licensed person, and I'm a licensed person, and you eventually are going to be a licensed person, and you're a master's level person. I mean, so we have people around here that surely have the right educational background and the right experiences, but yet it doesn't filter into people's daily lives. And I wonder, because when you talk about it, it's so personal and impactful that it upsets your life talking about their life. Now, an effective helper would be able to manage that. We know that. But I mean, but we try at least to help. And so you wonder, because I know at the college we do have like a grief group out of the counseling department. I don't know if it deals with this kind of grief. I'm not sure. I should ask and try to find out. But there is a movement on some of the colleges to try and deal with it. But it's still kind kind of like hidden.
Taboo subject.
Yeah, it's a subject
It's
that a lot of
elephant in the
people
room.
don't want
Yeah.
to get to. You think? Now you were in college. You said you couldn't find any help
Yeah.
at IUP.
I would say, well, I actually didn't seek it either.
Oh, okay.
I was suggested to go, but I kept being like, no, I'll be fine, you know. But I think it is this, my fear, which is unreal. It's not real. I think a lot of people, when you experience such tremendous grief, and when you feel like you're not past, you never get past it. When you feel like you're at a point where you can kind of maintain in your daily life, I would always tell Miss Dorothy when I would go to counseling, I would be like, I can't do this. I'm never going to get myself together. I'm going to be still here in your office for like weeks. I'm never going to be able to get out of here. And she was like, that's not a real thought. Like let's talk about this. You'll cry. You'll probably cry for a while. But by the end of our session, you'll be okay. You'll be able to still get up. You'll still be able to, go to class or go to work. You will be okay. You will come out of this okay. I think sometimes it's hard for you to actually imagine that you'll still be okay from this, because regardless what a person is experiencing in life, whatever the grief is, you feel like it's so traumatic, you just don't want to talk about it with people.
You're gonna lose it.
You're just going to, you're going to lose it. And it's like I can't, discuss it. I don't want to say anything about it because I don't want to go back to that place. And I don't think people are realizing, like, if you start going to that place and start working through it, you will be okay.
Yeah.
And the healing will actually start. And I know for myself, I got so traumatized when I went to Mothers in Charge because I ignored it for 2 years. I just spiraled into this emotional train, and I was like, wow, I wish I would have, went to counseling or talked to someone about
I often
it.
say in the different shows, because I read a little bit about Carl Jung's work, and I often say that it's humanizing the shadow, that negative aspect of what happened. If you let it sit there, it'll make you evil. I mean, you won't be able to live at all. And when you humanize it by sharing it with other people, it heals. It has a kind of a healing component to it. But for some reason, a lot of people don't want to share it because it's so painful. And I think that's the wonderful thing I think that you're doing, that you allow that work to occur and you accept it. Now, believe me, being a person who has treated a groups of different people, it has a toll on the therapists and on the counselors, or the certified peer specialists, whatever we're saying. And it's interesting that you say that we have to have our little self-healing kind of, and it's a constant caring, I assume, because who could listen to this? I mean, with all your compassion and love, I mean, you need a place to heal yourself, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier, that grief is not something that we talk about.
Okay.
I think, too, we have to educate people, and especially in the African American culture. It has always been that, what happens in this house stays in this house. So you suffer in silence, you don't talk about it, and the ministers, the faith-based community was a very important part of what we did with whatever we were feeling. So we didn't seek professional help oftentimes, we just prayed about it.
Right.
And I had a young lady who, in my office yesterday, who said, and it's only, I think, been 9 months for her, and she's saying that her family are telling her, come on, let's move on, you got to get past this. And people are uncomfortable when you're in pain. If your family or the family that are around you, they don't want to see you suffering and in pain, so they want you to be like you used to be. you know,
Yeah.
and get better and get over it and let's move on. And that's not something you want to tell someone when they're grieving. Everyone has to use their own timetable to work through their grief
Sure.
and begin that healing. But I think part of that healing will have to be that you're going to have to talk about it, especially if it's a traumatic death or with someone who is very significant in your life. You know, you can't just move on and put it past you and forget, like people oftentimes will suggest. But that's because people don't know
Yeah.
what to say, so they think they're telling you the best thing for you when actually that is not the way you begin to heal. But talking about grief is important. I think we need to educate ourselves more on the grief process, and that would help us to understand what it is that we need to do when we've lost someone.
Yeah, I think it's totally correct. And you never really get over it. I mean, this is like this thought in the culture that get over it. I mean,
when I hear that,
you hear that all the time, and you want to say to them,
skin
I
Yes.
think you need to manage your life,
Yes.
and you need
Right.
to
Learn
put it
to
in a
live with
place
it.
and learn to live with
Yes.
it. But it's always on the mantle, as they
always
say.
there.
It's always there, and you are different for the cause of that event. The question is, are you more resilient, and can you be more reactive, and can you survive?
Yeah.
But you never really.
You never
I mean, I still talk to my father. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Talk to my son.
Yeah, I talk
to
to
both my
him.
brothers.
You know, before I go to bed, sometimes I wish he was here so that I could talk to him. And I can't say too much about it in this meeting because I'll start crying.
Well, you know,
You know what I mean?
you almost
You're
triggered
good,
something
though.
in me there.
But not on TV, right?
Yeah, you almost triggered something. You know, one of the things I explain to people, where my mother is buried at is in close proximity to where I used to live at. And part of my grieving and dealing with grief and loss, I attend the cemetery like at least
yeah.
every 2 weeks.
I talk to her.
Yeah, I don't wait to a birthday or the date that she died or Valentine's Day, but I'm so accustomed to going there. The people that work at the cemetery, the guy says, "Man, say you a hell of a dude,"
Yeah.
because it's comfortable for me, and that's my process. And you know, and I'll tell you
And
why.
that's different for everyone.
Yeah, you know,
Someone's watching right now saying, "Oh, that's morbid to go to the cemetery," but it's not morbid.
exactly.
It's what helps you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it keeps me in contact with her, I would say. And you know, I went one time, and there was a young lady there. She was sitting in front of the stone, holding onto the stone, crying crazy. Now, what that said to me was either this is her first time there, or she doesn't. You know, everybody can't do that. So you're right. We all find our way to communicate and deal with it. But I tell you,
I've
triggered
actually-
that in me.
I've
Pat. I
actually-
almost was going to start crying over here.
I actually have sent people to the cemetery because whatever their problems were, they still had problems with their mother or their father. And I said, "Well, where's your parents buried?" And they would say, "Oh, in my case, this holy sepulcher, you know." And I would say, "Well, why don't you go and talk to her?" And they look at me like I'm real crazy, you know, when I say that. I said, "No, go talk to her. That's where her remains are.
Yeah.
Her tombstone's there. Go talk to her." And it's amazing what kind of an experience people have when they go to a cemetery and talk to the grave. You know, in the sense of a very positive experience. And it's a way of like, it's almost like the dead person becomes counsel to them. You know,
Yeah.
Well, it's a way you continue the relationship too.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know,
And heal relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. And making amends and all those other things and writing letters. And
It does
Because
sound a
because the
little
death-
morbid, but it isn't actually. It's not at all. It's actually quite healing.
It is.
Don't you think?
I took
Yeah.
my lunch to one of my brother's cemetery that was the first time I went, the one who was murdered 2 years ago. And I felt like I had unfinished business that
Yeah.
I did not get to discuss before he passed away. And so to me, it was very therapeutic. Like I had to get off my chest,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
like things that I didn't get to say. And so I just took my lunch there, and my internship was more than like, you need to go, you should go, and like take some time through the day to
How
go.
did you feel afterwards?
I felt really good because there was something that I always wanted to talk to him about that I felt like I got robbed of not ever saying it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I feel like I just need to say this here. And so I said what I had to say, and I felt good because it was just something I felt like I was carrying around for these 2 years. And I do think that just carries over into your grief. Like if you've had, maybe you got into an argument with your loved one, and because it's so unexpected, you feel like, oh, dang, like I wish, I knew I should have said that day, but, goodness. So
We see, this might sound funny, but like where my parents are buried, I can go talk to them. And then I can go like a block away, like I say, a block away in the cemetery block. And I can go talk to my grandparents.
Your grandparents.
And then I can go down the street, so to speak.
That's what I do too.
and talk to my brother.
Yeah, and it's nothing wrong with
No,
that.
I don't think there
People
is at
will
all.
say that's morbid, you shouldn't go, but whatever works for you. I do
Yeah.
the same thing. I had a daughter that passed away before my son did. She died of bacterial meningitis, and they're both at the same cemetery.
Yeah.
So I see them both,
Yeah.
different sides of the cemetery, but I'll go and visit them both, put flowers, or just have a conversation, just tell them how much I still miss them.
Yeah.
That love is eternal, it doesn't die.
That's exactly right.
Love is eternal.
Forever.
Forever.
Yeah. I think I was watching one of your documentaries, and I think there was a scene, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were at your son's gravesite. Yeah.
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 Did you, I don't know, sometimes I was reading quite a bit of, Mothers in Charge, and was it you that lost one or two?
Two.
Oh,
of
two.
my
Would you
brothers.
mind telling us a little bit about it? You
Sure.
lost another brother?
So my oldest brother was killed my sophomore year of college. And that's kind of how Miss Dorothy found out when I came my senior year of my undergrad. And then 2 years ago, and that was my mother's only son. My
Okay.
dad's only son was murdered 2 years ago.
Wow.
And they both were murdered here in Philadelphia. So I felt like once I kind of worked through one,
So you lost two
I lost both of my those are my only brothers.
only brothers. Wow. Talk about resilience. How do you survive that and continue on and get a master's degree? Talking about resilience.
To me, I feel like I don't have a choice. Like this is,
Yeah.
I mean, they always supported me in school. They made fun of
Lost
me.
two, you
I
killed
They
always-
make fun of you?
brothers.
Yeah, because I love school, and they were like, "Oh God, you're going to be in school forever." So I know that they would just be proud of me
Sure.
to keep going.
Yeah.
I do practice more self-care than I did when I lost my oldest brother, though, and so I found it like through meditation, which I did find at Miss Dorothy's.
Meditation's a good thing.
I do. I
Yeah,
do
it's a
still
good thing.
meditate, and I read like a lot of books and
Self-help kind of
self-help
books?
kind of
Yeah.
books, or people who have experienced the same thing I've experienced. I'm just talking about it, so I'm very open to talking
When you
about it.
read, we've all, I think, sitting around here read those books. It's a part of like our lifestyle almost. When you read those books, what do you get from them? Like for example, when I read them, I see people's journeys, and I can kind of look at them and say, gee, that looks like a little like me, and
Indeed.
if that person survived, I guess I could survive. That's what I get from someone. I'm wondering, is it
That's
is it fair?
yeah, and not that it's actually the end, but my focus is more on kind of how they got to the place where they are now. Because again, I feel like I always have this fear where I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do it. And so when my second brother got murdered, I went through a really, really dark time in grad school, and so I was still going to class, I was still working, but I was so emotional. Like I cried at the drop of a dime. Like I would be in class and I had to leave early, and
Wow.
it was a lot of stuff. Because I felt like when my second brother got killed, it re-traumatized me for the first
the
one.
first.
So I felt like I was living through both of them at one's funeral, and so it was very traumatic for my family. And so for me, when I read them, I'm always like, well, how, like if they can get there, like it's not real. I I can also, still be in a good place and get through this. And so that's kind of why I read them. But meditation has really
helpful. Yeah, it
really
is.
really been
A lot of those
helpful.
alternatives, people don't practice them enough.
No.
They
very
really
good
don't.
helpful.
They don't pray, and not that I want to get real crazy with the religion here and spirituality, but they don't. There's times when you need to pray.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a fact of life. I mean, I think that there's cognitive behavioral techniques that we all can be helped with, but there are times when no one can help us except a little special
Except a little.
communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean, I really do, and that's happened to me as I gotten older. When I was younger, I was really like cognitive behavioral therapy and reality therapy, and and I almost ignored the sense of one's spiritual presence, even though I grew up, was a Roman Catholic, and I was an altar boy. I was all those things,
An altar boy.
Yeah, I was an altar boy. Yeah, so I did all those things, but it never stuck. It stuck with me more as I got older.
Yeah.
And I guess that's partly getting old.
I think so.
You know what I mean? You kind of like know that maybe I won't be here in 20 years. That kind of story runs through your mind.
No,
But I don't know how you, You know, sometimes, here's what I'll say. Sometimes when I hear people's stories, I say to myself, and your story just now is one of those stories, I say to myself, why am I complaining about life?
I
Do you
say
know what
that
I
about
mean?
other
Why
people.
am I complaining when I have a good life? I got my grandchildren. No one, you know, I lost my parents, but they were pretty much natural causes, and my brother wasn't. But I mean, but it was, you know, a physical reason why. So and sometimes it gives you comfort. I hate to say it that way, in other people's tragedies.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I think it gives you perspective too.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I think that has a lot to do with how we go through life as our perspective. You know, you can feel like, oh, this is the worst place I've ever been in my life. You know, I'm never going to survive this. But then you'll hear someone else's story that will oftentimes encourage you and change your perspective on how you see your own life. You know, that tragedy in their life may give you a reason for hope that you can survive and that, you know, becomes your motivator for you because now you're looking at your situation with a different perspective. So perspective is everything. You know, are you looking at your situation half of the glass half full or half empty? That's important. So perspective on how you look at things is really, really important. And I think sometimes I try to not so focus on the things that are wrong in my life or things that are going crazy, but to take time and be grateful and have an attitude of gratitude. You know, and think what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for this today.
Yeah.
You know,
And, you know, there's a
because
whole
sometimes we
school-
forget to be thankful
Yeah.
for the things that are going well in our
yeah.
life and the things that we have.
And there's a whole school of thought out there now, positive psychology, you know, that
Mindfulness.
and
And
mindfulness and the whole, you know, resilience that we've done. We did a show on resilience. It's all that.
important.
And I'm beginning increasingly to believe that if you stay negative, you'll be negative.
Absolutely.
You stay positive. Now, it sounds like a simplistic way of looking at the world,
But
but
it-
it's not that simple because to stay positive, you have to really work on
You
it.
do.
work on
You
Indeed.
do.
I think too, for me, I work with young people, and so, you know, some of them are my age or younger, and they have experienced things in their life that I look at my own experience is not even close to what they experienced.
What they're going through.
And they still get up, and they're still happy, and so I feel like I can do the same thing. You still show up, and you're so dedicated, and I'm asking you to do this, and you're 17. Then I can do it, and I'm 25.
Yeah.
Well, you're a joy to listen to, actually, because you're young and you've had a tremendous amount of tragedy in your life, and make no, you know, excuses for that. But you seem to have really got a good balance on it now.
I've
you
had
think?
good people, Miss Dorothy.
And you work, and you
mean
still
that's
working
from
while
Ms.
in
Dorothy
school?
work at that LPC
I still
that
work
she has
at
at Life
Wow.
Professional?
Normally I ask people for $20 on the air, but I'm not going to do that. Tell us a little bit about your daily, you
Yeah,
know,
what's it like?
You know, What's
Yeah.
your daily movement like, Monday through Sunday?
It's crazy. So I usually have, the semester is over, so that's great. But typically I'm in class, I work Monday and Tuesday, but I also have class at night. Wednesday I have my internship, and then I work at night, which is the same on Thursday and Friday. I work during the weekends. So I have always worked when I was in college. So I still work to put myself through school, and I'm still an honor student.
Great, wow.
So I still maintain my grades. So I work throughout the week, and I attend class throughout the week, and then I'll have to find time to do my work and like get it done.
So when you're working with mothers in charge, what do you do that might be uniquely different or the same as what, say, some of us older workers might do, or more mature workers might do?
Well, so I still do some work with Miss Dorothy outside of it.
Okay.
But when I was there, I really enjoyed that I got to work with a lot of young people, so
Okay.
people who are my age. And so she always felt like because of my age that I could have this voice to really reach young people and kind of get them talking. So we would do these really cool events.
Like what kind of events?
my-
are you talking-
So we would do youth panels.
Okay.
Sometimes we would do like youth groups and kind of talk through people's grief. And then I also got the opportunity to do some workshops at Youth Build,
Yeah.
which was that was more so focusing on like how to change your thought process to help change your life. And I really think that just like helped guide me into grad school because working with people who are my age, and to me, again, they always are like, oh, we're so amazed by your story, but I was always so amazed by their story.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of like what they were still going through in their lives, but they still like showed up to my classes, and I'm like, I'm only 23, and they're like 21 years old. We're not that far apart. But I got a lot of experience when I was an intern and when I worked at Mothers in Charge, and I do think, even in the smallest way, I think I'd love to help millions of people. That's my goal. But even if the fact that I like touched a few young people who are my age, that meant the world to me. And like I had people when I was at Youth Build, like, please come to my graduation. Like, you don't know how much, we appreciated you all coming. And so it kind of turned over into the work that I'm still doing through grad school.
And I think she also was able to model. A lot of young people don't see positive role models in their homes or in their communities.
Yeah.
And she was that for them. I remember we went to Carson Valley School. Carson Valley is a residential facility where children live, because of...
It looks like an old little English village.
Yeah, right at the end of the
You ever been there?
Yeah, it's a beautiful, like a campus, like a college campus
Yeah, it
almost.
does. Yeah.
And they live there. And some of the young girls that she was able to connect as a result of our working with Carson Valley, which we've done for many, many years, she was a motivator for them to think, wow, she's only a couple years older than I, and look what she's doing. Maybe I can, do that. So she was just really a blessing, for the time that she worked there. And even when I asked her now to come back and do different things, for the organization, she just really, brings an amazing perspective.
Yeah.
You can tell by her smile that she has a tremendous amount of respect for you.
No, I do.
I know, I can tell by
so
the
much
smile.
for me.
And I respect her as well.
Okay.
I really do.
I do.
And, traditionally, a lot of times, we were just over at the new, I'm not going to call it for Youth Study Center, it's called the
JJSC.
JJSC. And we was just over there a couple of weeks ago with a program called Engaging Women of Color. But when I think of your story and the young women who I saw over there, you would really be profoundly impactful to them. I'd like for you to get over there and talk to the young women over there, 14, 15, and 16, 17, 18 years of age, who could really, really just hear your story and help them.
Well, if it's in my schedule, let me know.
I'm going to put it in there.
Okay. But I intern at the Juvenile Law Center, and so I work with their advocacy program, which is Juveniles for Justice.
Yeah.
So it's working with young people who have been in the juvenile system who would like to advocate for a better system. And then I also work with young people who have been in the child welfare system. And so we advocate, and we work with JJSC.
Cool.
DHS and other provider agencies in the city to create these really big awareness projects on what's happening with youth and young people and like the services that they need to be successful in life. And they're great, and I love it.
Create a social media for young folks that are grieving.
That are grieving?
You can do that.
I actually want to create a blog.
Come
I'm
on,
in the
do
process
it.
Good idea,
of,
actually.
in the process of working on it, but that's my goal, is to have a blog.
That's a good
Be good.
transition into a conversation I think we had earlier before the show. That some new activities that you're involved in that we had spoken about with women in prison. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what you're trying to do that's an extension of much of the trauma and work that you're doing.
Because Mothers in Charge initially started off working with families who've been affected by violence, but because we wanted to change the situation, so there's a whole intervention and prevention piece of what we do. So while a woman was incarcerated in Riverside, her son was murdered. And we started going to Riverside Correctional Facility, which is the only female correctional facility here in Philadelphia. And we met her and started going there, doing grief support and grief groups and things like that for many of the women who had lost loved ones there. And just felt that they needed so much more. So for the last 6 years, I want to say, we've been doing a program called Thinking for Change, which is
Thinking for Change?
Thinking for a Change.
Oh, for a change.
Yeah,
okay.
it's a cognitive skills curriculum that we teach 2 nights a week, and we've done that, for, as I said, for the last over 6 years. And we've had many women who've gone through the 3.5-month program and graduated. We provide a graduation for them. We just had one the other night, cap and gown dinner and a whole nine in Riverside. But then they come home, and their issues are so different from men coming home from incarceration. So we have now designed an aftercare program. We help women that are coming home, and we help them to get their families back intact and their children, and just provide a whole array of services, helping them with job skills. So we did a 10-week job skills program. For 10 weeks, it was a pilot program funded by the Philadelphia prison system for women who have come home in the last 90 days, to give them a 10-week job skills training program. They came Monday through Thursday from 10 to 3, were paid $10 an hour, which is big money for,
Yes.
it's not big money, but it's a good help for women who are just coming home.
It's a good start, 10.
Great
We're trying to
start.
get that as the national minimum. We can't get it.
Yeah, how about that, right?
Yeah.
And so we taught them all kinds of skills, and including, we dealt with grief and loss and all kind of things that they were dealing with as a result of coming home from prison. And we graduated 13 of those women, and we got them all placed in jobs.
Yes.
And we actually hired 3 of the women ourselves at Mothers in Charge. So that's part of what we're doing, really trying to focus in on women who are struggling with returning to their communities. So WTW is a part of that. That's the newest program, Women Together Working. And that's a drug and alcohol component, along with the cognitive skills of thinking for change. It's a strong collaboration, or I want to say integration of agencies, 2 agencies, Caring Together and Mothers in Charge, where we're providing these support services for women to come home and stay home with their families.
And Caring Together is what kind of an agency? I mean,
Caring-
I know it is, but the audience
Caring
doesn't.
Together is an agency under the direction of Dr. Barbara Schindler, who's a psychiatrist, who's done this probably for 25 years or more around drug and alcohol, substance abuse issues for families, and especially for women. And she and Mothers in Charge, her agency and Mothers in Charge, are collaborating now to support women through the recovery process, as well as the cognitive skills piece, which Thinking for Change says if you can change the way a person thinks, you can change their behavior.
Yes.
And that's the premise for the for that particular
It's a
curriculum.
good premise, actually.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the original cognitive behavioral premise from Dr.
Yes,
Beck.
yes, it's not new, but it's
And
it's
his
new,
work
it's
has
new.
been very well.
Yeah, it's new to many of us.
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But
I think I'm very remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I did come to the one
Yeah,
graduation
graduation.
ceremony, and to be honest, Pat, astounding to hear the stories of the women to come home. Excuse me, the reunification process, getting the kids back, getting little stuff like Social Security card, birth certificates, GED, and to listen to the stories were very moving, and I applaud you for that, because
Thank
to
you.
sit in the audience and know that these stories aren't fabricated, that these women had spun considerable amount of time incarcerated.
Yeah.
I think the one girl said, I had done like 10 years. I'm thinking.
Yeah, she
10
went in at
years.
18, I think, and came out 10 years later.
Yeah.
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 But she was such resilience. I mean, she's one of the ones we were able to place in employment as well, and she's doing quite well now. A lot of the women, ShopRite was one of the folks that hired some of our women, and a lot of them have made their 60 days now, and they're doing well. They're permanently employed there. So it was an excellent program. We're getting ready to start our second program of Women Working for a Change, as soon as we get all of the funding that we need to be able to pay the women, pay our facilitators.
Sure.
So if anybody's out there who wants to help support this effort, it's a genuine
Good
effort. It's a
I'm
good
sure
effort.
at the end we'll flash
Okay.
how to get in touch
Call
with
Mothers
you.
in Charge, yeah.
Indeed.
And so that way, anything that we can do to support that
We
effort, we surely
appreciate
want to
that.
do.
We appreciate that.
Now, you say the difference there, I know that in the addictions field, we know that there are differences in the pathology and in the healing of men and women. What would you say are the unique characteristics of women who are healing as opposed to men? I know this is right down your alley.
Well, it's really down
What
Mr.
he
Ford's
said.
alley as well,
Wow.
but I'm going to take a shot at it. I believe that oftentimes, especially women that are mothers, not only have the challenge of coming home and facing all of those barriers and challenges that they have as a returning citizen, but if they're a mother, they've got to find out where their kids are. And their goal is always to want to try to, get their kids back and be, so it's in housing. So it's different for housing. If you're a single guy and you need a place to live, it's a little different than if you're a mom and you got 5 kids.
That's right.
So,
Very
Very
good
different,
point.
yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
you want to add anything to that?
I just think, in terms of looking at the differences, employment,
Yeah.
and men have a tendency to be able to survive on their own. There are a host of different shelters out there,
Exactly.
and there's always an attachment and separation, and the pain and grief of didn't take care of my kids, so right now I need to get myself together. So I applaud women who come back, returning citizens, and that whole thing of re-engaging or reuniting with their kids is quite difficult. And I've watched women who come back and get their kids back and maintain stabilization, maintain that. That you need to applaud that to the women
absolutely,
that are
because
doing
there's nothing
that kind of
easy
work.
about that at all.
Yeah.
You know, and there's so many, you know, barriers that prevent you from doing that. You know, employers don't oftentimes want to hire, so we've got to connect with employers who believe in second chances and things like that. But I do applaud the women who are able to come back and get their lives together, because it's very challenging. And I think we've always focused mainly on men returning, because that at one time that was the largest population that was incarcerated. But today we're seeing more and more women, you know, that are separated from their children and families as a result of incarceration. I think the war on drugs had a lot to do with that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, when you talk about the war on drugs, the speaker you had there, and it was really interesting. I think she mentioned the fact that we spent $67 billion on a war on drugs when we should spend $67 billion on war on bad schools.
Exactly.
What do we do? We incarcerate them every year for about $22,000 or $30,000.
Yeah.
And to put them in rehab is about $1,900,
And
$2,000,
it's
something
only-
like that, depending on who you read. But, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the war on drugs, because, you know, Michelle Alexander's work, if you're familiar with that work, dealing with the new Jim Crow and the fact that many of the prisons have become the new mental hospitals, so to speak, and the new places for homeless people, because we don't have the state system, and then the incarceration of certain people of color into those institutions. So, you know, and there's a lot of that going on right now with the discussion with the Attorney General and the President trying to offset, and, you know, and
Yeah, the speaker that Derek refers to is Andrea James. She's out of Boston, and she wrote a book called Upper Bunkies, and she's doing a lot around legislation work and things like that, having to do with incarceration of women. She says the war on drugs was actually a war on us.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we're not supposed to be too opinionated on this, but I kind of agree with you that it probably was more of that, because you just have to look at the prisons and you can see what is going on.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we're going to end the session, because it was such an exciting discussion, really. And I was wondering maybe if you could tell people how they can get in touch, and we'll also flash it probably
Sure.
at the bottom.
Mothers in Charge in Philadelphia is located at 1415 North Broad Street, the Leon Sullivan Human Service Center, right there on Broad Street, between Broad and Master. We have a website, and that's mothersincharge.org, or they can call us at 215-228-1718. I also want to just mention that we have a major event coming in June 16th. It's going to be in Washington, D.C., and it's going to be Survivors of Homicide, bringing national attention to the issue of homicide in cities across this country. So we'll be on the Lincoln Mall in in December. I'm sorry.
In June.
We'll be on the Lincoln Mall in June of 2015.
And we want to thank you and wish you the best, and you
Thank
get your
you.
MSW, and you work with Mothers in Charge, et cetera, et cetera.
You'll be paying FICA.
Yeah, all that. And Derek will be Derek.
Okay.
And,
the very
and
end.
Pascal will be Pascal. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today. I want to thank my guest for joining us today. I want to thank you, the viewers, for tuning in. You have been watching the Tapestry of Life on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I am Dr. Pascal Scholes, Professor of Behavioral Health and Human Services. For more information, contact us at the college. See you next time. Thank you.